do we find a spectrum within Islam on the question of the relationship of faith and reason? And from your own perspective as an Islamic thinker, how do you understand that relationship?
You know, I think one of the major problems that happened a few years back when the Pope gave the famous talk.
The Regensburg.
Right, the Regensburg talk in Germany. And he was actually quoting one of the last emperors of the Byzantine before Istanbul, Constantinople fell. I think he was about 90 years before the fall. And he was quoting him about the irrational nature of Islam. And then he quoted a Muslim theologian, Ibn Hazm, who's an Andalusian theologian from the 5th Islamic century. And there's definitely been, as you know, in Christianity and in Judaism, there are strains that are anti-rational. And you find that within the Islamic tradition. And historically, the Muslims had a fundamental crisis between this idea of what they called naql and aql. Naql is what the revelation is that's transmitted, and aql is the intellect and how it grapples with the revelation. So reason and revelation, and the interchange between these two. And this became one of the fundamental debates in the early Islamic tradition. And there was a school called the Mu'tazilite, that are the rationalists, that argued that religion has to be consistent with reason at all times. And they took an Aristotelian position that if it could not be justified rationally, then we would reject it. And the counter to that were two schools. One was a traditionalist school that argued that reason doesn't have any place. We just simply accept what's been given to us, and the intellect will just lead us astray. This school was a very small minority school that now a modern version of that school is what we find, for instance, in some of the extremist traditions today, and certainly in some of the positions in Arabia. But I would not lump all of the Saudi scholars together. It's very dangerous to do that. There are some very enlightened Saudi scholars, even within what's called the Wahhabi tradition. They don't like to be called Wahhabis. But even within that tradition, and I have friends from that tradition, but some of those scholars it's unbelievable what they come up with because of their rejection of reason. Logic is forbidden in their school to teach. Whereas in the dominant strain of Islamic tradition, you have a balance. And they talk about the two wings also of faith and reason, and the importance that, in fact, Fakhruddin al-Razi, one of the greatest theologians of Islamic history, there's a verse in the Quran called the light verse, and it said that God sends this revelation down, and then it says light upon light. And he argues that it's reason upon revelation, that if you don't have the light of reason to interact with revelation, you're blinded by the light of God, as opposed to guided by it. That you need your own reason to enable you to see with the light of God. That revelation without reason blinds you. It does not enable you to see the truth. And this becomes the dominant position, and this is what taught. I studied Aristotelian logic with West African scholars. I mean, they still are very committed to the Aristotelian tradition. They haven't really had the additions that Bacon or John Stuart Mill or others have added to the logical tradition, and there's certainly have no idea of symbolic logic or some of the madness that modern logic has, and I'm not saying that flippantly. I mean, the fact that we've removed logic from, even in law school, they no longer study, in most law schools, they don't study formal logic, and, to the inability to understand, the Arabs, what I was taught by one of my logical teachers, he said that the foundation of understanding he said it's first tasawwur, conceptualization, and then he said it's hukm, judgment, and then he said, and then it's reasoning with those two, that you need those two tools to do the third. And then he said, but the hukm is based on the ruling, the judgment about a thing is based on its conceptualization. And then he gave me this principle, al-hukmu ala shay'in far'un an tasawwurihi, which means Before you can judge a thing, you must grasp and understand it in all of its understandable dimensions. And so this is the idea of really teaching people how to think